Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about a model of digital career management that I've developed, which I call the 7 C's of digital career management. And so I suppose where we start really is that increasingly we do many things online. So we learn online, we increasingly find work and actually conduct our work online. In fact, our careers take place online as much as they do face to face. And when we're thinking about how we career online, we can do it well. And so I've got an example here of somebody I think who is very effective, who's a career coach called Amy Bateman. And she makes lots of videos and they're really worth watching if you want to learn about how to do lots of career related learning. But she also, I think, is a very good example of someone who uses the medium very well. So we can be a very effective online career actor, or we can be something of a less effective online career actor. So this is the TV star Roseanne Barr. Now she used social media and made what many argued was a racist tweet, and as a result of that decision, she lost her TV show. So when we're thinking about how we work and deliver our careers online, how we conduct our careers online, we can do it well and we can do it badly. And because we can do it well or badly, I think it's worth thinking about how we advise people and also what skills might make us and knowledge might make us more able to be effective online as opposed to less effective. And this was something that I've written about in a book that I wrote before called You're Hired Job Hunting Online. And so I'm going to draw some of the ideas out of that book to talk to you now. So one of the things that I talk about in a number of articles that I've written is this idea that there are a number of career management skills, or what we sometimes call digital career literacies, which are helpful to you when you're conducting your career online. I refer to them as the 7 C's of digital career literacy: changing, collecting, critiquing, connecting, communicating, creating, and curating. So the first one is the idea of changing. So the idea of changing is that we are always changing all the time. The world is always changing, and so is technology. And so our ability to manage this change is very important to our ability to act and react online. The second of our skills is what we call collecting. So that's the idea that there's lots of information available online and we need to be able to access that information and make good use of it. Our third skill is critiquing. That's the ability to understand the information that's online and make sense of it, decide what's good and what's bad. So an example of this idea of critiquing that we talk about in the book is this CRAP test, that we look at currency. So when was it produced? Is it still relevant? Relevance, authority, who produced it, and how much do we trust them? Its accuracy and its purpose. Why did somebody produce this? And if we put this together, this gives us a way of doing that kind of critiquing. And I'd argue that as well as critiquing ourselves, we should also be teaching our learners to do some of this critiquing. Our next C is the idea of connecting. The internet offers us a lot of ways in which we can connect with others, and that's a really powerful tool for helping us to advance our career. So if we think about the idea of networking and we think about all the different social networking tools that we can use, there are some key principles that might underpin our online networking. The first is that we should observe reciprocity. We should always give as well as take when we're networking with people. We should help people as well as ask for their help. The second thing is equity. We should treat people equally when we're working with them online. We should strive to be as authentic as possible. Although it's possible online to pretend to be someone else, it's not generally a good idea, and the online environment is actually incredibly good. People are incredibly good at finding out when you're not being authentic. However, alongside those, we also want to be strategic. We want to think about what we're trying to get out of online networking. We need to be tenacious. We want to work hard and not give up easily. Building a network doesn't happen overnight. And we also want to evaluate our network to work out whether it's working for us. So if we put all of these principles together, we get something which helps us to build effective online networks. We then want to think about communicating. We need to be good at communicating, and we also need to learn the skills of communicating online, which is somewhat different to communicating face to face. And we also need to be good at creating artifacts and information about ourselves. The online environment gives you a huge opportunity to publish and say what you want about yourself. You can create your CV, but you can go a lot further than that. You can showcase some of the skills that you have. You can show the things that you're good at. You can also bring in your contacts and colleagues from your network and get them to celebrate you. There's lots of things that we can do online which allow us to create a picture of ourselves that's much more convincing than a traditional CV. Finally, we need to be able to curate our online persona. So we create information about ourselves online. There's always information about us online, even if you may feel that there probably isn't very much about you. Even the fact that there's no information sends a signal to a potential employer or colleague. And so we need to think about what we're presenting about ourselves online and to take control of that and try and do something about that. So that's not so easy, but there are some things that we know from research that we should probably try and avoid. So we don't want to be seen to be unprofessional online. We don't want to criticize our employer typically. We don't want information about undisclosed criminal activity, depiction of excessive drunkenness, or bad writing. These are things that employers will often cite as being things that they would find problematic when they audit somebody's online presence. So what can we do with it? Well, there are various things that we can do to deal with these kinds of problems. The first one will be, obviously, don't put it there in the first place. The second one will be to delete it or make it private if you're able to do that. Ask other people to manage the information that they hold about you. Swamp it out by providing lots of other information that's more positive, or explain it if you can't do that. And so what we're doing here is we're starting to think about how we might turn some of these skills, these 7 C's skills, into strategies that we could actually work with our students and our clients on. So for example, dealing with a problem that they see when they're curating their online presence. So that's my model of the 7 C's, and I hope you found some of it interesting. I hope it gives you a useful framework for discussing online activity with some of the students that you're working with. However, this 7 C's framework has been critiqued by one of my colleagues at the University of Derby, and I think it's worth briefly rehearsing some of his critique. So Staunton says that the kind of skills that we describe in the 7 C's have a context, and they can't be learned or practiced outside of this context. So we've got to be careful about pretending to people that we can just teach them some skills which they can use regardless of where they are or who they are. Skills can't bring about outcomes by themselves, so just being a really good career manager doesn't necessarily mean you get a great job. There's lots of other things that are going to make a difference to that, including inequalities in society, but also your capabilities beyond the digital realm. The 7 C's are something of an ideological wish list which prepares the neoliberal subject rather than the critical citizen. This is what Tom argues. I don't necessarily agree with this, but his point is that there's a danger that we're telling people that they have to endlessly change themselves and order themselves. And I suppose the example of that would be the idea of not putting negative comments about yourself online. So we learned that employers don't like it when you criticize other employers or when you participate in activities that they think are antisocial. Well, in many cases, these may be things that it's your right to do, and we need to be very careful about advising students or clients not to do things which they have the right to do just because an employer won't like it. We run the risk of moving from a situation where we are reflecting and advising on reality to the situation where we're kind of creating it. And finally, the concept of literacy is hierarchical, and it renders some as illiterate, and I think that can be very problematic. So we end up in a situation where we're saying if you're not good at these things, you're essentially illiterate. You can't function in the modern world, and we need to be careful before we make those kind of claims. So Tom presents an alternative. He says we need to have an inductive approach to the internet. We need to look at context as part of the internet and respond to it more critically. We need to also recognize the communal aspects of the internet, and we need to be critical about things that are going on the internet. So my response to this, I think, would be that there's much, I think, in what Tom argues, particularly the choice of literacy as a terminology, which I think I increasingly would move away from. But frameworks are starting points rather than locked rooms. I never intended the 7 C's to be the final word on digital career literacy. I think it can offer you a useful starting point to work with a student. They're not skills, but areas for learning and action. And I think it's important that you recognize them as so. We can't just teach someone how to curate their online presence. It has to be done in context. It depends on what tools and activities they've done, and it's a process of thinking critically about this. And I think the 7 C's can actually encourage criticality, social perspectives, and a range of different responses towards surveillance. So I think we need to think about all of these things. But the choice obviously is yours. I'm not suggesting that you should use the 7 C's all the time, but I think the 7 C's can offer you a useful framework when you're working with clients and you're trying to help them to think about how they interact with the internet and relate to their online environment. So rethink, rework, and remake them for your context and your philosophy. And however we theorize it, the internet is going to be an important part of our careers for the foreseeable future. I offer you some references here if you want to follow any of this up, and I also offer you my contact details. Thank you for listening.